Welcome to the Guitar Channel. I'm super happy to welcome you a new interview. I have on the other side of the Skype connection the one and only Sam Tharp from Fretish.com. Sam, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Pierre. Thanks for having me.
Okay, you are not completely freezing in Boston, or are you?
We had a very cold spell for the last couple of weeks, but it's now just starting to heat up. In terms of centigrade, we're probably at maybe 4 or 5 today, so
All
not bad.
right, it's
Yeah.
springtime again. Okay, cool, excellent. So before we start to talk about Fretish.com, Sam, you have to tell me what was your very first guitar?
Wow, my very first guitar was a no-brand Japanese electric guitar that my uncle had handed over to me when I was probably about 8 or 9 years old. The action was extremely high, probably an inch from the fretboard, so very painful to play, very old, rusty strings. But the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single footstep, so that was
Yeah.
my first.
And so
uh,
tell us, how did you go from that very first guitar to starting a startup like Fretish? What's the story?
Yeah, well, in a nutshell, I've been playing guitar for about 30 years now. And at the same time in my professional life, I was fortunate enough to work in a number of internet companies like America Online. I was the product manager for Instant Messenger when that launched. Spent a number of years at Monster.com, which is a
Okay.
large job board
Hmm.
here in the United States. And so it was through that professional experience that I found a way, or came up with the idea of figuring out a peer-to-peer marketplace for musicians who have instruments that they're not playing regularly. I have a collection of, literally a dozen or more guitars. I can't play them all at one time. So the idea was maybe I could generate a little extra income from these instruments while I'm not playing them, but they'll actually get played. So there wasn't one specific aha moment, but it was a recognition of things like Airbnb and Uber and this whole notion of the sharing economy and
Yeah.
what would that logically extend to. And so musical instruments just seem to be one of those more obvious categories.
Hmm. And is there some kind of play of word behind the name Fretish.com? I guess there is a fret part, but what's the ish part?
Yeah, so I am online regularly looking at a lot of guitars. It's kind of a hobby of mine. And you'll commonly see people hashtag their images with things like guitar porn or gear porn. And so, in the course of brainstorming ideas for this business, I thought, oh, well, this would be kind of a clever play on fetish, which is to have sort of an attraction for an object and then apply it to the instrument, the guitar. So Fretish is very much a play on the sexualization we have for the instrument.
Okay. And when you meet someone for the first time and you want to talk about Fretish, what's your elevator pitch?
It's very simple. Fretish is like Airbnb, but for guitars. So just replace the real estate as the property with musical instrument as the property, and that's the basic premise.
And so the idea is that if I register to Fretish.com, I am able to borrow an instrument from someone in my area. But the very important question is how do you solve the issue, the trust issue between the owner of the instrument and me who wants to borrow one of your guitar?
Yeah. So that's an excellent point. And trust is definitely, I think, what is the foundation for Fretish. It needs to be there. It has to be there. And so there are a number of tools that we give the instrument owner to make an informed decision about who they want to rent to. So one of the tools that's in place is there's no immediate renting of the instrument from someone. There's actually a 3-day period in which the owner can assess whether or not they want to rent the instrument to another person. So they can communicate with them through the Fretish messaging system to determine, are you a smoker? Do you have small children in the household? Do you intend to, take this out on a gig or something? Anything that causes a red flag for an owner to say, I'm not really comfortable with renting this out. You can easily, without any reason, just reject that rental request. So that's one thing. The other thing is you can follow some common sense protocols as the owner, such as don't rent to anyone who has never rented on the platform before. Don't rent to anyone who doesn't have anything other than perfect feedback ratings. And then you do have the option to purchase a renter's insurance, and you can require the person that's renting the instrument to have music instrument insurance. So those are all things that can contribute to a more pleasant experience with limited chance of damage to the instrument happening. Having said all of that, if something does happen, Fretish is going to make every effort to make the owner whole on their instrument that has been damaged. So we carry a liability insurance, and we'll make good faith efforts to, A, prevent anything bad from happening in the first place, but B, if something does happen, we'll make sure that the owner gets made whole, so to speak.
So let's say, let's walk through the process. If I want to rent an instrument, how much is it going to, what is the usual cost for a guitar? I guess it depends on the instrument, right?
It does. On average, what we're seeing now is the nightly price for a rental is in the neighborhood of $30 US dollars per night. There are some instruments that are listed on the site that are very valuable, so $5,000 to $6,000, and the owner has the right to list their instrument at whatever price they want. So for those higher retail value instruments, just the other day I rented a Martin D41, and that was $200 per night. So it can go as low as $6 per night. We have a custom builder in Connecticut who really wants to get his instruments into the hands of players, and so he prices very aggressively. And then there are others who really say, this is reflective of the value of this particular instrument. And that's the range we see. But for the most part, $30 is the typical average.
Okay, and on the other side, so let's say I want to rent an instrument. Let's say the cost is $30 US dollar for someone to rent my instrument. How much am I going to get out of those $30?
Yeah, so you, the owner, captures and receives 89% of whatever the listed price for your instrument is. So to use a round number, if someone rented their instrument for $100 a night, they would net $89 at the end of the transaction.
Okay, and so we talk about the trust, what's the business model for you, and what about the actual exchange of instruments? Is that local pickup only, or do you people send back and forth an instrument? How do you see that?
Yeah, so technically a person has the option to ship their instrument or do in-person pickup and drop off. I strongly recommend that if you are renting out an instrument through Fretish, that you only make it available for in-person pickup and drop-off. There are a number of reasons for this, first of which is just maintaining that level of integrity between who you're renting to making sure that they know there's a real person at the end of this transaction, getting a sense for who they are. And it also fosters a sense of community, just sort of meeting someone and making that established contact. The other thing is that here, particularly in New England with the harsh winters, you really don't want to be sending your instrument out on a truck to be delivered somewhere else. It's not particularly good for the finish or the neck or any part of the instrument, unless you're talking about a piece of equipment like a pedal board, an effects pedal. Those are things that might make more sense if you were interested in renting them out and then shipping them to people beyond, say, a 50-mile radius of where you live. But for the most part, if you're renting an instrument, I recommend doing in-person pickup or drop-off, typically at a public space like a library or some other venue that you feel is convenient for you. You don't necessarily want to have people coming over to your house, but that's entirely up to you if you choose to have people come pick up and drop off at your house. If you are selling an instrument through Fretish, which you do have the ability to do, then by all means ship away, and that's not a problem.
So that means that if it is mainly local pickups, the circulation of instrument is going to be more or less locally in a range of, I don't know, 10 or 20 miles around where you live, depending on where you are ready to take your car to pick up an instrument and back and forth, right?
Yeah, I would say here in Massachusetts, it's probably that 20 to 25 mile radius of where you are located is what people generally are comfortable with. In Texas, people have driveways that are about 20 miles long, so the radius might go out to about 50 to 60 miles.
And how do you plan to attract more people on the platform in the renting, in both sides of the business?
Yeah. So what I've been doing thus far is fairly manual and not particularly scalable, which is to have guitar gatherings. And that's pretty much what it sounds like, having a function or an event at a venue, inviting people who are musicians to bring their guitars, really almost like a classic car gathering where people show off their hot rods, but in this case, they're showing off their instruments and building a sense of camaraderie. It's hosted, it's catered. People have the opportunity to play instruments, each other's instruments, and it's a way of fostering that sense of community that we're trying to do here at Fretish. So that's one way. The other way is through developing video programming, which I then run on YouTube. So basically giving people an overview of how Fretish works, what it is, and then specializing the message for guitar owners versus guitar players versus guitar builders, and then having dialogue like this with you and I. So these are some of the ways that I'm going about growing the business right now.
Can you give us an idea of the kind of instrument we can find on Fretish at the moment?
Right now you can find everything from electric guitars, Fender Stratocasters, to Gibson Les Pauls. There are a whole range of effects pedals that we have, from wahs to digital delays to analog delays. And we even have some percussion instruments, so a snare or two, a number of crash cymbals on the site. And the site itself can support a whole range of other instrument categories like ukuleles and pro audio equipment. But for now, it's primarily guitars and effects pedals. And there's a couple of basses, maybe like 4 basses in total listed on the site right now.
Okay. What are the next step, the top secret next step about the project you could share with us?
Well, this is probably another 6 to 12 months down the road, but the idea that I've been working on is essentially arranging for guitar gods, people that are well-known musicians, and I'm not trying to imply that Eric Clapton is lined up or Eddie Van Halen is lined up, but getting some of those masters of the instrument to list their instruments on Fretish, I think would be a huge draw. Now, those probably be fundamentally structured differently in terms of rental. So instead of getting the instrument, taking it home for a night or two, you'd have to go to a location that's controlled by the artist, and then you'd be playing the guitar under supervision of their guitar technician for a number of hours, 2 to 3 hours. It would be a little bit like fantasy band camp, but you'd literally be playing the instrument that someone wrote a classic song of your youth to, and you'd be having that experience of being able to play an instrument from one of your guitar heroes.
And what about a guitar store? I guess a guitar store who would be selling some used instrument could use Fretish to circulate some instrument and eventually maybe do some sales?
Yeah, there's a huge incentive for retailers to work with Fretish. particularly if you're talking about categories like effects pedals. We have a school here in Boston for music called the Berklee College of Music, and every fall semester, new students arrive, they walk across the street, they go to the Guitar Center, they buy an instrument or an effects pedal, they take it over to their rehearsal studio, and then several hours later they return it saying it wasn't quite the right sound, it wasn't exactly what I was going for. So if Guitar Center used Fretish to list some of those equipment categories, then they could save themselves the trouble of having to do all of the returns and relist things that are now used as opposed to brand new instruments or equipment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Anything else we need to cover about the Fretish.com project?
It's pretty straightforward. It's free to join. It's free to list. And we only take a part of the transaction if we actually generate business for you, the instrument owner. And for you, the guitar player, it's a great opportunity to try before you buy. So maybe there's an instrument that you've been thinking about, but sometimes the retail experience is not particularly ideal. So you go to a Guitar Center, and there's nothing wrong with people playing Metallica through the Marshall stacks, but if you're trying to really understand the feel, the tone of a guitar, it might be better to take it home, plug it into your own amplifier, and really sort of digest the whole experience. And so does it fit within the rig that you currently have? So Fretish solves that problem for you, the guitar player. It also represents an interesting opportunity for musicians who maybe are touring and they've had an issue with their equipment being lost or damaged, so they could pick up a guitar very quickly for an upcoming gig, or a recording musician who maybe really wants to have a particular sound when they go into the recording studio, but they don't have that instrument and they don't want to just buy an entirely new guitar. So that's really the value, if you will, of Fretish to musicians on both sides of the marketplace.
All right. Well, Sam, it was great to be able to talk to you. So thank you very much for your time, and I wish you all the best for the rest of the adventure with Fretish.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pierre. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.